Hi everyone, I just want to share something interesting that I came across this morning. I was doing some research, and in my last video I noticed how in this verse over here in Isaiah 66 verse 17, where it talks about what I believe is a reference to the restoration. In the first part of the verse it says, "They that sanctify themselves and purify themselves in the gardens behind one tree in the midst." And so this would be the restoration, those who are in heaven. This would be the restoration of the Garden of Eden. And then this would be the alternative, those who are on earth and are subject to the Antichrist. So over here it says, "Eating swine's flesh and the abomination and the mouse shall be consumed together." So this would be what would be taking place on earth. And I had pointed out in my last video how this word over here in the Greek, after I had looked it up, I noticed that this word means heaven, and it also means the Son, as in Jesus is the Son, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. So it was a reference to Jesus. So I realized that in the Septuagint it's continuing to talk about the restoration, and then it talks about the abomination of desolation and from this point on. And so I was speculating that if this word is referring to Christ, then this must be referring to the Antichrist, to the mark of the beast. The eating swine's flesh must be a reference to the mark of the beast. So I decided to do a table, or I tried to do a table to test that theory out. And so I'll just show you the table. Okay, I started out with just Obama and swine flesh, but then added some more terms later. But as you can see, it came up in Genesis 4:18 through 23. And so then I added some more terms. I put in Obama, swine flesh, chip, hand, forehead, barcode, and all of those terms came up, and it's coming up in the same matrix in Genesis 4. But what's interesting is that this is the same matrix that comes up when you put in just Obama, and as you can see, it has 72 matches, and I've explained before how 72 or 70 is a number that represents the nations. It's also significant for other reasons that I've talked about before, which I can get into later. But as you can see, it comes up with one match. I mean, with this first verse over here that comes up in Genesis 4:18. And this is basically giving the genealogy of Cain. There's actually 2 Enochs in the Bible, and I've explained this before because I've gone over this table before. But there's 2 Enochs in the Bible, and this Enoch is from the line of Cain. But what I realized is that there's also 2 Lamechs. Okay, and this is the first article that comes up when you put in 2 Enochs. It's called 2 Enochs and 2 Lamechs. And so it talks about the 2 Lamechs here, and I'll just read this paragraph over here. It says, "This was recorded for our benefit so that mankind can be portrayed in that pre-flood world as one Lamech or the other." Ever prophetically speaking to us, the Bible shows that all descendants of Adam, whether they hail from Cain's line or Seth's, had reached their personal breaking point of Lamech, for better or for worse. The former Lamech spouts off elitist and violent words, while the later Lamech agonizes over the stress and adversity of life. There are no other quotes in either genealogy except for these 2 who share a namesake. So there's only 2 quotes in the Bible that come from genealogies, and those 2 are coming from the 2 people known as Lamech in the Bible. And so you have 2 Enochs in the Bible, And you also have 2 Lamechs in the Bible. One's from the line of Cain and one's from the line of Seth. And what's interesting about Enoch is, first of all, that's the word that you get the word Hanukkah from. It means dedication. And so the first Enoch came from Cain, and it's first mentioned over here in verse 17, in Genesis 4:17, where it says, "And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived." So she conceived over here in verse 17, "and bare Enoch," or Hanukkah, which is where you get the word Hanukkah, "and he builded a city and called the name of the city after his son Enoch." So the city was called Enoch, and Cain built this city, and this is when he conceived Enoch, and this is coming up in verse 17. Now, another reason why I was inspired to do this table is because I was actually in the middle of watching this video over here by Renee Moses' new channel. It's called the Rapture Puzzle, and actually just subscribed to the channel. I hadn't been watching the videos, and so this is one of the first few that I started to watch, so I have some catching up to do because she's made quite a few videos. But this is the video I was watching, and then she was talking in this point about how during the time of the first Hanukkah, during the time of Antiochus Epiphanes, she was talking about how he had put an idol in the temple, a statue of Zeus, and that he had sacrificed a swine on the altar rather than a lamb. And so that's what reminded me that I wanted to do this table to check out my theory about the swine representing the Antichrist, because it appears that the swine would represent the Antichrist, the mark of the beast, whereas the lamb would be Jesus. That's the true sacrifice, and then this is the Antichrist sacrifice. And so, like I said, that's when I tried this theory out, and I put in these terms, and as you can see, they all came up. You have the word Obama over here. It's actually going through the word Enoch. See the word Enoch right here. So it's sharing the O in Obama. And this is the first child of Cain. You can see that right here. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. So this is when the genealogy of Cain began. And the conception took place in verse 17. And this is where you have the letter O in Obama. And then you have the B here, the A, the M, and the A. And so you have this genealogy coming from Cain. And within this genealogy, you have the name Lamech as well as the name Enoch. So these two names are shared in both genealogies. In the genealogy that leads to Christ, you have an Enoch and a Lamech, and in the genealogy that leads to the Antichrist, you have an Enoch and a Lamech, and they begin in verse 17. But what's interesting about the word Lamech, and this is the word Lamech over here at Strong's 3929, and as you can see, it means powerful, and it relates to the fifth lineal descendant of Cain, as well as the father of Noah. So these are the two genealogies, one coming from Cain, the other one which leads to Christ that comes from Seth. And so what I noticed about Lamech is that, okay, it's over here where Lamech was talking to his two wives, and he was telling them how well, I'll just go back to this chapter, but he's talking about how God had told Cain that, over here in verse 14, it says, behold, Cain is saying, behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth. And so this is another example of the separation taking place in verse 14. So Cain is driven out, and he's exiled over here in verse 14. And from thy face shall I be hid. So he's being sent away from God. He no longer sees the face of God here. He's being exiled. And I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond on the earth, and it shall come to pass that everyone that findeth me shall slay me. And so then God said to him, the Lord said unto him, therefore whosoever slayeth Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord set a mark upon Cain. So this is the first marking of people. It begins with Cain. And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. So this is what's coming up in verse 17. This is the first child forming the genealogy of Cain. And unto Enoch was born these people up to Lamech over here. And so now Lamech is talking to his two wives, and he says, okay, it's over here in verse 23. He says, hear my voice, ye wives of Lamech. Hearken unto my speech, for I have slain a man to my wounding, and a young man to my hurt. If Cain shall be avenged sevenfold, truly Lamech 77-fold. So over here in this verse you have 7, 7, and 7. Okay, and then it starts talking about the other Lamech after this. It says, and Adam knew his wife again, and she bare a son, and his name was Seth. And this is to replace Abel, who Cain slew. And to Seth and him were born a son, and his name was Enos. And so it begins to talk about Seth's genealogy. And then it goes through here, through Methuselah, who lived 187 years and begat Lamech. So this is a year when he begat Lamech. And then Lamech lived 782 years and begat sons and daughters. And it goes on to say, and all the days of Lamech were 777 years, and then he died. So again, you have the 777 associated with this Lamech. So it was associated with the first Lamech that came from Cain, and it's also associated with this Lamech that comes from the line of Seth. It also comes up in this table that I did on the number 27, which is when I wanted to verify that the number 27 is a parallel for the number 17, that it's a reference to the year 2017. I just wanted to try it to see what would come up, and sure enough, it came up with 117 matches. And the very first line up on here is where it's talking about Lamech, and it says 770 years, and he died. So this was talking about Lamech over here at the very top of this table, where it said 27, 117, and 777. So this is where it said, all the days of Lamech were 777, and then he died. And then at the bottom of the table, it talks about 120 years, and of course this is the end of the 120th Jubilee. And so I just wanted to share that for now. That seems to be another confirmation for this year, 2017. It's talking about a conception here taking place, having to do with Enoch, which is where you get the word Hanukkah from. And it's coming up in this table that I did on Obama and swine flesh, which I believe is a reference to the mark of the beast. And this is coming up in Isaiah 66, verse 17. There's also this table that comes up in John 10, where it talks about the Feast of Dedication, but I'm out of time, so I'll have to continue in the next video. Thank you.